The last topic that we need to talk about in our energy unit is an emergency backup plan called fermentation. So, cellular respiration happens when there's oxygen present and it creates 36 ATP. But what about when there is no oxygen present? What are we going to do? If there's no oxygen available, the cell still needs to make ATP. Because remember, ATP fuels everything the cell's doing. Getting rid of waste, bringing in food, making proteins, repairing itself, getting rid of bacteria, keeping itself healthy. So even if there's no oxygen, the cell still needs ATP if it wants to live. So it can undergo this emergency backup plan known as fermentation. Now, fermentation is not as good at creating ATP as respiration is. Because remember, respiration takes 1 glucose and makes 36 ATP. Fermentation is only going to make 2 ATP per glucose. So it's not as good. But, hey, if it's an emergency and you need ATP, 2 is still better than 0. So there are 2 types of fermentation. There's lactic acid fermentation, and there's alcoholic fermentation. You need to make sure that you know what type of organisms can do each type and what the outcomes of each are. So lactic acid fermentation occurs in animal cells when there is a lack of oxygen. It's going to create 2 ATP and lactic acid. So an example is human muscle cells. When you run as hard as you can, you ran a marathon, you're pushing way past your breaking point, you are creating an oxygen deficit in your muscles because your muscle cells are using oxygen to create lots of ATP to help you run. But what's happening is your muscle cells are using oxygen at a faster pace than you can supply new oxygen to them. And so they start undergoing lactic acid fermentation, creating lactic acid and that builds up on your muscles and causes muscle cramps. Lactic acid muscle cramps are the really sharp cramps that happen while you're running, particularly in your side and your large muscles such as the quads. And they quickly go away once the body has taken the lactic acid away. How can you help prevent your body from getting lactic acid cramps? Working out more often. The more often you work out, your body gets better at using oxygen more efficiently, and it gets better at carrying oxygen to those muscles that are going to need it. So the more often you work out, the better your body is at using oxygen, so less lactic acid fermentation going on. You can also help your body out by doing your slowdowns after working out or applying some sort of heat therapy after a workout, such as sitting in a hot tub or steam room, because heat helps your body to remove lactic acid fermentation faster. So keeping those muscles moving, it's going to help move it out faster to relieve cramps. Now, the long-term cramps that you get from working out, the ones that you get the day after or 2 days after working out, and you're like, oh my God, I'm so sore from working out. That is not caused by lactic acid fermentation. That is actually caused by when you use your muscles really hard, you actually tear them, and then they have to repair and rebuild. So those sort of cramps or soreness a couple days after working out is actually, that's how you build muscle. Because when you work out, you tear the muscle, and then your body has to repair it. So different types of cramps, okay? Make sure you know the difference between lactic acid and then muscle tearing. Our other type of fermentation is called alcoholic fermentation. Now, yeast and then some microorganisms such as bacteria can do alcoholic fermentation. The outcome is 2 ATP, ethyl alcohol, and carbon dioxide, okay? So we have 3 outcomes here: ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and ATP. We found out that yeast can do alcoholic fermentation, and now we use it to make things that we love. So for example, if you want to bake bread, you put yeast in the dough, and then what happens is inside the dough, the yeast is in there and it's a living organism, and it doesn't have any air because it's stuck inside the dough. And so it starts to do alcoholic fermentation, which causes the dough to rise because they're creating little bubbles of carbon dioxide. And that's what the little holes in bread is. We also use alcoholic fermentation to make wine, beer, and yogurt. We just keep the alcohol inside of what we're making to make wine and beer. And that's how you can remember that it also makes the carbon dioxide. Beer is bubbly. This is also how you make root beer, and that's why it's bubbly, because it's got the carbon dioxide in it.